All right, so my name is Dan Kwan. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I am a full stack software engineer. I've been working with early stage startups for about 7 years. So 2012 is when I started programming professionally. I should say. Started programming professionally, and I've been doing contract engineering. So I don't work for a company. I don't do. I'm not like an engineer for one company for 7 years. What I do is I take on clients on a contract basis, and I build out their products or I maintain their products. And for early stage startups, um, typically teams of like 10 or less. My average client team is around 10 people, of which maybe there's anywhere between 1 to 3 engineers, so small. Typically, lately I've been doing a lot more what's called Series A level startups. And if there's any terminology you don't understand, just say like I don't know what you're talking about. But earlier on, I started at what's called the seed level startups, and that's kind of where you guys are, like Ben and you guys. And typically a seed level. So the competition, the pitch competition on Sunday. One of those startups, went on to win, let's say, $100,000, which actually happened. That's a seed level, and that's earlier on, 2012, 13, 14, I was working with almost exclusively seed level startups, typically 100 to 250K. So what that's given me is a very good perspective on a very wide range of startups, typically around 2 or 3 dozen in that amount of time. And it's given me a very clear window of what startups do and don't do correctly. And unfortunately, what they do incorrectly is much more common than what they do correctly at the early level, which is where you guys probably are. And so it's given me enough perspective to put together a presentation that I've seen where I've seen the same mistakes happen over and over and over again. And these aren't small mistakes. These are mistakes that will kill your startup, that will preclude any chance of success whatsoever, meaning right out the gate, you have no chance for the following. If some of these things, if enough of these mistakes culminate right out of the gate, not going to work. So the important thing is that these are preventable mistakes. That's the main thing I want to get across. So that's the main idea behind this slideshow. So let's go ahead and get started. And by and large, they break down into these categories. I would say these are in order of importance, or at the very least, the first one, personnel, is the most important. And then these remaining 3 are probably around the same in terms of importance. So the mistakes that early stage startups tend to make typically fall in these 4 broad categories: personnel, hiring engineers, obviously; technical decisions, like what platforms to use, what languages, what frameworks, things of that sort; actual missteps along the way of development. This is pretty much guaranteed to happen, so you have to understand area number 3, it's going to happen no matter what. The main question is, how do you handle certain situations? It's responding to certain scenarios properly. And number 4 is more of an extension of number 3, but this is something that almost certainly happens too, is feature creep. I think we all understand feature creep.
Sorry, Dan, what is feature creep?
Oh, I'm sorry. The feature creep is when you have a product, a vision of your product, and as you start building it, you keep on adding more and more to your vision. And next thing you know, what you're building is not at all what you originally intended. It becomes sort of a Frankenstein mess of too many things. That's feature creep. This is a very typical impulse of early stage startup founders. In fact, it's pretty much guaranteed to happen. Again, the question is how to handle it, how to deal with it. So the last 2 aren't so much about prevention, it's more about how to handle it, because it's going to happen. So we're going to go through all 4 of these, and that's going to be the main idea. So personnel, hiring devs. So is anyone here a technical person that has a technical software-based background? Okay. So 2012, 13, 14, when I was first starting out and going into 15, the typical archetype of my client, my startup client, is like a graduate student from a highly ranked university, like Wharton or Columbia, very typically Columbia, because I was in New York City. Typically in finance or law, Wall Street, coming out of Wall Street or private equity or hedge fund, things like that. And they have a lot of money and they want to do a startup. Non-technical people. But I want to point out these are highly intelligent, highly educated people with strong resources. So these aren't like unqualified people. So they're making poor decisions. One of those poor decisions is trying to evaluate the technical acumen of developers without being a developer yourself. This is simply impossible. I want to be clear about that. The depth of knowledge to do what I have to do has, for me, accrued over a decade, and I still feel like I don't know enough. And I'm still the problem is that it's not that there's so much to learn, it's that what you have to learn changes every couple of years. So what I did in 2012, 13, and 14 is nothing at all what I do today. And in 2018, when we go into 2022, 23, whatever I'm doing there technically will not be what I'm doing today. So the goalposts are always moving. And that makes it extremely difficult to evaluate developers because you don't really know the current sort of scene, if that makes any sense. Um, so that's a very common thing. So from a non-technical standpoint, what tends to happen is the founder or the founders will evaluate the engineers based on strictly cosmetic criteria. So the nicer your website, the nicer your resume, the nicer your portfolio, things like that, the more of a positive impression that makes. And that can lead to very skewed results. In fact, I picked up on that early on, and I started creating these iPhone mock-ups. And I was an iPhone dev in 2012, 13, 14. I created these iPhone mock-ups that have zero functionality. They literally didn't do anything, but they looked quite nice. They had a very nice aesthetic appeal. And that got me intros. That got me meetings and interviews and things like that. It kind of got me in the door. And then from there, I was able to land some iPhone contracts that I was not qualified for. I want to be very clear. In 2012, I was not a good engineer. But I was able to sort of work it through by sort of presenting myself in a very appealing way. And it's a very inefficient way of hiring. It's just not going to work. So I made a lot of mistakes. I learned the hard way a lot of things. Those first 2 years, very difficult to get sort of past all that. And that kind of leads to my last point right here. As a dev, it is actually very easy to sort of feign your technical sophistication. At least it is for me. It's easy for me now because I am much better now. I am very good. But let me give you an example. One area where I'm not good at is like IoT stuff. Because I don't study that stuff. It's just not my area. But I can fake it, and I can make myself look better in front of sort of the unsophisticated investor or founder, and then present myself in a certain way to at least give myself a favorable impression. And that's what happens. And we'll get more into it, but that's what happens to unsuspecting founders. So oftentimes the result there is you end up hiring a bad dev. And a bad dev is worse than no dev. You're better off hiring no one and just waiting. A bad dev will move things backwards. So this outcome is almost always exclusively driven by budget consideration. So let's say you want to build an iPhone app, a simple iPhone app, something simple. So think of Snapchat in 2014. Before the filters, before all this crazy stuff. Think of Snapchat about 4 years ago. I don't know if you remember Snapchat. Or a better example is Tinder. Tinder's not that complicated from an engineering standpoint. Right now, just throw out some numbers. How much do you think it would take? How much do you think it would cost for an engineering team to build Tinder today?
30,000.
That high, low? What do you think? 50? Okay. Yeah, it's closer to your number. It's going to be between 50 and 100. Now that creates a lot of sticker shock amongst the people that I worked with earlier on in my career. They would look for devs in the $3,000 range, $5,000 range, right? And they would try very hard to find someone to do it at that number. You will find that person. That you will find people to take that contract, $5,000 to rebuild Tinder. Here's what will happen. That project will never complete. They will take a long time to draw it out, They'll give you an initial estimate of like 3 months, a very appealing number, and then 3 months will go by, and they'll say, "Oh, we didn't anticipate this. We couldn't properly configure that. We need a little bit more time. Give us another month." Okay, another month, not so bad. A month goes by. "Oh, we didn't anticipate this, and we couldn't get the proper specs for that. Give us another 2 months." Okay, another 2 months goes by. I've seen this happen many times. And next thing you know, you're $15,000 in, you still don't have a working product. And at that point, the dev team knows that you're not going to jump ship because you're $15,000 in, right? That's the game they play. They already know this is going to happen. Does that make sense? This is a strategic move. So that's typically what happens with the outsourcing, the overseas outsourcing shops. So if you're going to like Upwork or Fiverr or whatever, and you're hiring a dev team in the Ukraine, or I mean, not to, I'm not putting down Ukraine, some overseas country that doesn't speak the language. I mean, you can find very good developers from Ukraine too. You can make this work very to your favor, extremely well as well. So I don't want to just denigrate the whole idea, but if you're looking at these overseas dev shops that are promoting rates like $15 an hour, $25 an hour, like rock bottom rates. It entices the founders, and then 9 months later, you still don't have working product. You just blew $20,000 of your budget for literally nothing. Like it's gone, and you lost all that time as well. And that's the typical outcome. And then eventually, at some point, you're out of money, and that's it. Your game is over. And I've seen that happen.
They enjoy doing it on purpose.
Correct. Or I mean, I wouldn't call it nefarious. Like, they're not waiting for you to fail. In an ideal world, they build a product and things go and work out, and they move on. But let me put it this way: they don't care if that doesn't happen. They care if the check's clear and they keep on coming in. And this is sort of the game they play. This is the tech world is full of sharks and like lawyers and just people who are there to take advantage of unsuspecting people. And the worst part is when I can kind of see it happening, and the startup I'm talking to still doesn't take my advice. And I'll show you a couple examples of where that happened recently. So that's the typical outcome with the overseas option. Another option is hiring like a junior dev domestically. So a big problem is the language barrier, right? Like, let's say you don't want to hire someone halfway around the world who doesn't speak English in a different time zone. You can find a cheaper option domestically if that person is not quite professional yet. So a junior developer, maybe in a master's program in college, or even like an undergrad, like a senior just about to graduate, or increasingly these days, coding boot camp. A recent grad of a coding bootcamp. That's an increasingly popular option. And this seems appealing at first. A couple things that could easily go wrong here. First of all, junior dev is also just not up to the task. And I'm speaking from the personal perspective. The difference between me in 2018 and 2012, it's just no contest. It's no contest. It's several orders of magnitude better. I'm so much better today than I was 6 years ago that looking back then, I wouldn't even consider that person a professional developer. That's how bad it is now. Let's say a junior dev charges $30 an hour, very appealing rate versus like some $200 an hour you're going to expect from a senior dev. In Silicon Valley, in New York City, it's around $200 an hour as the median, right? So it's a pretty 7-to-1 difference. It's pretty substantial, right? So, it's a 7-to-1 difference. So, what would that confer from an engineering standpoint? The junior dev or the senior dev works at 7 times the speed of a junior dev. That would be a reasonable approximation. It's not like that. It's more like 50 times or 100 times faster. What I do today in a day would have taken me a month in 2012. And that's not an exaggeration. But more importantly, the junior dev might not even be moving things forward. So that's assuming the junior dev even can move things forward. The thing is that they might be moving things backward. So, what do I mean by that? So, like, if he throws together a database-driven website, right, that's written in Java, and the database is MySQL, right? Well, the Java web server might work and it might do what you want it to do. So from an aesthetic standpoint, it's like, oh, this is good. You're doing a good job. I'm glad we hired a junior dev, right? But at some point, you're going to want to hire someone more professional to take over the operation. That's really the idea. Because the junior dev implemented in Java, you're going to have a very hard time finding a senior dev who wants to take over that project, because the back end is written in a language and a framework that no one uses anymore. It's outdated, at least in this startup environment. Java is used in other environments very much today, but in the startup world, it's not. You're going to have a very hard time finding someone to take over the project. It's going to turn people away, all right, the senior devs. So you've essentially sort of handicapped yourself to just other junior devs, people who just need the work, right? And without knowing that that's what happened. And again, I'm speaking from personal experience. I am guilty of this. I did this about 4 years ago. I implemented a backend in Java, and then, so I'm not denigrating anyone but myself here. Like, this is a mistake I personally made when I was more junior.
So it's easier for junior developers to use Java. Is that there must be some?
No, that's I would no, that wouldn't be the
Why
correct
did they do
conclusion.
it?
I made the mistake because I picked up Java in 2010, thinking that that would be the primary language for the backend. I miscalculated, and then I just didn't move from it because my primary stack was iOS. So all the server stuff I didn't really care for anyway. I just needed something with some database persistence. I just had to get something working, and that's it. And that was my motivation. And so I didn't really move on to other more popular web frameworks between 2010 and 2014 because iOS was my only thing. And so when my client said, we need you to also put together a backend for this, I threw together a Java-based backend using what's called servlets. Servlets and Java was very popular in like 2000. Like it's 15 years later, and I was still, I was doing it. So I was just off in terms of my knowledge base, and it messed up my client because once we tried, the idea was for me to set up a quick backend and then hire a dedicated backend engineer. But all the good ones were like, this stack is not something we're comfortable doing. So I messed that up.
What are they comfortable? What do they prefer?
Oh, so
You'll get to that.
yeah, but
Okay.
a quick answer to that is today in the startup world, it's going to be Python, Django. That's the same. Like Django's a framework, Python's a language. Node, Express. Those two by far are like very, very popular. That's 1 and 2. Ruby on Rails is a sort of a distant third right now. C# is currently moving up. So that's Ruby on Rails is going down, C# is going up. So, but right now they're kind of behind the two powerhouses I just mentioned. And then PHP will always be around. That's just never going to go away. So that's what happens here when you hire junior. So what do we do about this? If you're a founder of a non-technical founder of a startup, you can't go it alone. You have to find a technical resource to help guide you with decisions. Now, and that's also part of what I'm doing here, by the way. In Washington, D.C., I just moved here in August, so I'm new to the area. Part of what I want to do is help startups guide them with the right technical decisions. Now, oftentimes what founders do is they confuse this with finding a technical co-founder. If you can do that, by all means do that. But that is much easier said than done. I am solicited to join a startup maybe on average once or twice a week. I can join a startup anytime I want to. It'll take me about 2 weeks. Anytime I want to. And if I go to San Francisco, it'll take me 2 days. So it's not as easy as it sounds. The packages, the competition for finding a full stack CTO is undescribable.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a good way for me, a bad way for the founders, right? So for very often I'll get sort of pitched by my friends, or like my friends of friends, or like my brother's friend from college will say, hey, I got this great idea. He's a lawyer now or whatever, and I want to cut you in at 30%, and like we can be co-founder. So I have to explain to them, well, I'm already getting offers at 175K like every month, a couple times with the equity. So I'm getting the cash and the equity. So how are you going to compete with that? And then usually the standard response is, well, my company is going to IPO in 5 years or whatever, and you're going to be worth $400 million. That's typically the conversation, right? So you have to be aware, from an engineering standpoint, we are very used to these conversations. And I've actually gotten to a point where I've asked my friends to stop referring, like, just please don't, I don't need those conversations. Because what happens is it leads to sort of ruptured relationships. I just don't want to have those conversations anymore, because then my friends like, why didn't you work with my buddy? Yes, and that it becomes more of a, like a maintaining nice good relationship type of thing, right? But once people find out you're a software engineer, pretty much every party I go to, which isn't that many, but like, let's say I go to a holiday party, right? Which I'm going to next week, right? I guarantee someone's going to say, "Oh, I got this idea I want to run by you." I promise this will happen, and then I use that to just build relationships now. Like, go call me, come by my office, and we'll talk, and that's it. But I'm not going to join unless their package is so competitive. I'd be a fool not to. But that hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Just ask a quick question. If you're a non-technical founder and what would you focus on? Just finding somebody who can be part of your like core team, like of 2 or 3 like people running the business, or is it better just to look for a developer to hire to like work on an eventual product? Is it better to just get a CTO when you're first starting out, or is it better to just kind of outsource or just?
Certainly depends on the nature of your product, but with your product in particular, Ben, I would say don't focus on the developer. To keep doing what you're doing. Get stuff going up. Your website looked like Squarespace, I would say.
Yeah.
And
that's just because my limited tech knowledge.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. It's fine. It looks fine. Like, it looks good.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that.
So that's what I mean. Like, you didn't need an engineer to do that.
No.
Right. And if you can use that to gain some sort of user base, user traction, some sort of SEO optimization, that's way more important than the tech right now in your case. So it depends on the nature of the company, right? Yeah. Whereas my company, Turbo, it is a technical company. I can't sort of content market my way through. The nature of my product is very technical, and also I'm a technical person, so it's fine either way. So that's a case-by-case basis. So the moral of the story here as a non-technical founder is you need to find some sort of technical guidance. I wouldn't worry so much about a technical co-founder unless that circumstance presents itself. Now, maybe your brother-in-law or your mom's friend is an engineer and does want to work with you. Number one, consider yourself extremely lucky. Like, say, thank God. And number two, yeah, that's a good option. Then do that. But most startups, non-technical startups, they don't quite have that luxury. So even if it comes down to finding a technical person who you trust and just offering a $1,000 retainer fee and saying, I just want to offer a $1,000 retainer and just for your feedback and advice on certain scenarios. Like, when I put out a job ad, first of all, does the job ad look right to you? Am I putting down the right terminology? Am I asking for the right things? And number two, when I get resumes and what's called a GitHub repo, when I get these GitHub repos, can you evaluate the technical acumen of these GitHub repos? And I'll show you some of that after I get to the end. And that sort of thing is most technical people would take you up on that. Like, yeah, sure. For a friend, I'll do it for free. I've done that for free for friends all the time. Just they'll get resumes, and GitHub repos are more important than resumes. And I just look through it and like, yeah, this guy knows what he's doing, or no, not so much. And that's it. So so the main thing there is ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Okay, that's the most important thing. So, and again, just to full disclosure, this is a service I want to offer here primarily to the Georgetown startup community, as well as GW and DC in general, the startup community. This is part of what I want to do moving forward. I'm also training devs. That's why I have the workshop at 3, where I'm training devs so I can identify the right developers for startups and whatnot. So Okay, the stack. So choosing a framework, a lot of mistakes can be made here. It's not there's a good stack versus a bad stack. The stack generally relates to the technical decisions you make for your product, the literal technical decisions. So what language, what server, what deployment platform, database, that's all the stack. Now there's no like quote unquote bad stack decision. The more important thing is knowing what's right for your startup, right? That's the important thing. Problem is there's just so many options, right? So Irene, you were asking about, instead of Java, like what are the popular options? Well, these right here: Node, Django, Rails, PHP, C Sharp, and like all this other stuff. And if you haven't seen this before, it's just overwhelming, and I totally understand that, right? So these are all great options. The question is which one's right for you, and also understanding these are the implication here from a human resources standpoint is very important to understand. So, which one has the biggest labor market? PHP. That means you're going to get the lowest cost because supply and demand, right? But PHP is also like sort of the least popular option amongst tech guys. So, are you getting the best technical guys? No, you're just getting cheaper ones. Does that make sense? The best technical guys right now today, circa 2018, are right here. These two, right? And then, like I said, C Sharp is trending up. So, and then to give you a quick example, let's say you want to do like a artificial intelligence startup, right? AI startup or machine learning, and you have no technical implementation yet. This is a crucial juncture. You don't want to use Node Express. You want to use Python, Django here, because machine learning and AI, that's all done in Python. Right, so you want to find engineers who can communicate with each other literally in the same language, Python. Right? That doesn't mean you have to hire a machine learning or data science engineer right away. Your web guy could be a Python guy, but when you do hire a data science engineer, ideally you want them speaking the same language, like literally Python, because that'll really help down the road, make things smoother down the road. And that's what I mean by human resources implications. That's an important thing to understand. That's what I was getting down to right here. So that's kind of point number 3.
So do different frameworks, do they perform better at certain tasks? Like you said, for Python, for data analytics, Python.
Yeah.
Why is C Sharp coming up quickly? Is there something?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
C Sharp it's moving up quickly, especially here in the DMV area. I personally think it's largely because of government-based contracts. So the government largely use C Sharp. And because DC is growing in the tech startup scene, I mean, Amazon's moving here. Like clearly, things are happening here, which is another reason why I moved down here. The C Sharp, I think that's a big part of the reason why. To be honest, is it superior in functionality and performance to the others? No, they're all pretty good. There are technical implications. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that, but I think that to answer the C Sharp question, I think that's why. C Sharp is pretty close to Java too, so. And then you're getting, continuing with the stack, you have a lot of other considerations here. So very often I'll get a startup saying, I want to build, this product, but I also want to build an iOS version too, right? And an Android version. Well, okay, you just tripled your cost. I mean, the iOS app alone is $40,000-$50,000, just the iOS app. Right? And then you've got the web stack, which is probably around the same these days, and then Android, and they all have very different technical considerations. So like the web stack, for example, you have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, Bootstrap, whatever. That's all web stack. iOS, you've got Swift, React Native, Xcode, Apple Developer. Like that's different. That's a different set of things to know, right? And then Android, you've got Java, Go, Kotlin, Android Studio, Google Play. These are all very different, right? And it's not like one should be expected to know the other very easily, at least at the beginner stages. If you're on year 10 of your career, okay, I can kind of see that. But if you're on year 2, it's not a reasonable expectation. Does that make sense? So sort of the misconception here is to find that one magic guy or girl who's like, I can do all that. These people exist. They're just not on year 1. Like that, you have to understand that consideration. each one of these is its own industry. So for the first 3 years of my professional career, I exclusively lived in iOS land. I made my whole career on that, and that's it. And then around 2015, I shifted over to web. I spent about a year and a half kind of doing both. And then since then, I'm only in web land now. I mean, I can go back to iOS, but the work here has been more lucrative lately. So I shifted over, right? And you have to understand that it's not like a magic sort of unicorn. Just one guy just does them all. Yeah, Ben.
Sorry, when you have the money and you're able to devote to one of the platforms, do you think it's important to just go to web first or to focus on the mobile app?
Yeah, great question. That was actually my next point.
Because people are like, oh, you have to build an app. You have to build an app. It's like, well, you want your website or you want your product on the website to
Correct.
be good first before you build the app. Is
Right.
what I was thinking.
So, as always, the answer depends again. So, is the nature of your product, can it be delivered through the web, or does it have to be mobile driven, right? So, those are the important considerations. And then once you make that decision, that's where you should focus your primary resources. I will tell you, native app development is probably the most expensive because it's the hardest to find. Hardest to find developers who can do it at a high level. But maybe your product is exclusively app driven. Like Uber, you can't do Uber on the web. It has to be an app. But what that means is Uber's website can be pretty minimal, right? Like Uber's website doesn't have to be that great. So you can spend like $2,000 on Uber's website, and like that's good enough. I'm sure they spend more, but like you could do that. But then you're going to need to spend $200,000 on the app, and I'm sure they spend way more than that. So it's deciding where to allocate your resources. And again, going back to yours in particular, I would say web is fine. Stick with web. So that's to answer your question particularly. So, and then sort of the last area of the stack is deployment. Servers. Where do you actually host your product? This is where things can get really hairy. So these are server deployment platforms, what they call the cloud these days. That's all this stuff up here, right? So AWS, Heroku, DigitalOcean, Google Cloud Engine, Turbo is my company, and it's a cloud offering. Firebase, Meteor, and this list is only maybe 25%. Like there's a lot more options, right? So, and these vary in terms of complexity and developer availability, things like that. And the wrong choice is often made here. The levels of difficulty and the requirements on the developer are tremendous here. So you get from pretty much beginner, which is Heroku and Turbo 360 are kind of at the beginner levels. Like you can learn these things within like month 1 of your development education. AWS, like I'm still learning it. Like I'm still kind of getting my hang around that. Google Cloud Engine, same as AWS. Like it's just such a massive offering. And some of these are kind of going away, like Meteor. This is one of those options where if you start your company on Meteor, you just ended your company. It's not going to work. Because it's going downhill. Developers are leaving it. It's trending in the wrong direction. And you're going to have a hard time finding developers who can do it. The ones who can will eventually jump ship. I did a Meteor contract about a year and a half ago, summer of 2017, so a year and a half ago. The Meteor experience was so onerous and just I didn't want to do it. I just said, thanks, but I don't want to work on this anymore. And that's what happens because the good devs have options and they don't have to work on stuff they want to. Yeah.
Sorry, what is a deployment platform?
Oh, so when you create a website, you have to host the actual site on a server, and that's called deployment. Does that make sense?
So it's just for websites, not for apps?
No. So apps are on deployed as well. So an app, think of an app as just a website on your phone. That's not literally true, but like it needs the same infrastructure. It needs a server, it needs a database, it needs to handle the same kind of general things as a website. And that's also done through deployment. Okay, so I would say from a stack point of view, if there is a mistake that's going to be made, it's going to be made here. And just to be more specific about that, AWS is the most popular option for deployment. because it has the most flexibility. You can just do anything on AWS, but with great power comes great responsibility. It's very hard to get up and running, and you have to handle everything. So let me give you an example. When your server crashes on AWS, it's on you. Wherever you are, you might be on vacation with your family, doing on Disney World or whatever, doesn't matter. You have to stop what you're doing, log into your AWS console, find where the server crashed, restart what's called the instance, restart the instance, and that's on you. Let's say you have a server, or what they call an instance, running on AWS, right? And you have a lot of traffic, you get some traffic, but one day you get featured on CNN. Now your traffic is up to 10 million. Your one server will not handle that. So what are you going to do about that? You have to now be ready to handle that scale, what's called the additional load. So you got to create more instances to handle the duplicate load, but that's not enough. You got to create what's called a load balancer. So when so many requests come in, by default, they're going to go to the same instance. It's going to crash that instance. Even if you have 4 more running, sitting right behind it, they're just not doing anything. So you have to create a corresponding load balancer to take those requests and equally spread them across all the instances, right? And then once the traffic dies down, you don't want to pay for all those servers all day. You got to scale them back down, right? And then if you want to do that on an automated basis, that's called auto-scaling. This is extreme engineering, right? And this is what I've done. Like I do this. But this takes such a level of sophistication that most people don't come in with. But a company like Heroku, you don't have to worry about any of that. Or Turbo 360. You don't have to worry about any of that. I take care of that for you. You don't have to even think about that, right? But you might have sort of a naive engineer who's on year 1 or year 2 of their career, thinking, I want to get on top of the AWS stack, biting off way more than they can chew. And this, again, this is these are things I've seen happen. Is what I'm trying to say. So this is going back to my other point. This is kind of Ben's question. Focus on the most important core elements of your startup, your company. And if that's mobile, that's fine. That means don't devote thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars to your web stack. Find a simple solution. So if you're a mobile application, you want to find the easiest deployment platform. That's going to be Heroku or Turbo, right? If you're web-based, you want to flip the script. Don't even do mobile. Just forget mobile, right? And focus on your web stack and make sure that that's doing everything you need it to do, right? If you want to do like real-time chat and live video sharing, things like that, that's not just something you can do quickly on a WordPress site, right? So you need to hire some real engineering for that. And that person doesn't have to be a mobile expert, but he should be a web, back-end expert. He should know his AWS stuff very, very well. And so that's where you want to make those considerations. Yep, that's the idea here. And sort of the final phase of sort of the most common mistakes are the actual development process. And this is what I was saying earlier on, where these aren't things you're going to prevent. These are things that's going to happen. It's more about how you handle it. Okay. So over optimization. This is when what you're building is way too good for what you need. And so the AWS example I just described is a very typical scenario where you get an engineer who's sort of over-eager. It's a good thing to have, but it's not a good business decision. You get an engineer who's over-enthusiastic about doing all this great tech stuff for your simple little site that just needs to run a blog, right? And so you're building on top of all these crazy new cutting-edge technologies. So like the auto-scaling load balancer stuff I just explained, that's been around for 10 years. That's not even new. That's not even cutting edge. I'm talking about like what's called containerization, which is a very new cutting-edge technology. Not very new. It's about 4 years old. Microservices architecture using a GraphQL database. Oh, it's not really a database, but a query language. These are all cool new things that I love working on, but I can't build my client to work on this while learning these things. That's unethical. This is a dirty little secret of technology. Engineers do this, Engineers take on a project thinking, oh, I want to learn Docker containerization. That sounds like fun. I'll take on this contract and I'll learn it while working on this contract. That sound like a good deal for you, right? That's not a good deal for the
Well,
startup.
actually, if you're upfront about it, it might be.
I can see that,
Yeah, because in other professions it happens too. So.
correct. But
But it is a time drain.
yeah, if you're upfront about it and things work out, great. But this kind of decision will prevent any possibility of success. Is one for like you're saying, I'm just paying you to learn. This won't go anywhere now. This is an expensive education for you now. Like you see the difference? If you know the outcome is eventually you will become the engineer long term. I mean that can work, but you'd have to find an extremely driven and talented person. Like this person would have to be so like preternaturally like talented at this that
Is it hard to get it right the first time?
it's impossible to get it right the
Okay,
first time.
right.
That's kind of what I'm
that's
trying
the
to say,
challenge,
right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And if you find someone who actually pulls that off, like that person can get hired away by Google at $300,000 a year immediately, and then how are you going to compete with that, right? Like, if someone pulls that off the first time, who's maybe like a college senior or like a grad student, that person's going to Amazon. Amazon's going to pay that person at least $200,000, like right off the bat, right? And how are you going to compete with that, right? So that's not just anybody. Is kind of what I'm trying to say. A good analogy is sports teams. Like imagine, like in a basketball team, if I'm putting together an NBA team, I'm like, just any 5 guys will do, right? That's kind of the mentality I see a lot among startup founders. Or I can get, LeBron James and Chris Paul and James Harden, Kevin. All of a sudden, you have quite a different team.
You want a good start.
Right, exactly. Or look at the Cleveland Cavaliers now, just 5 guys. Just 5 guys who are, yeah, right, just 5 guys. You see the difference?
Yeah.
The difference in startup world is even more than that. Like it's the disparity is even greater than that. So I would say the biggest sort of misconception is we just need a guy who can plug in there and do the technology, and that's going to kill your startup. Yeah.
How much can you appeal to a potential tech team member or co-founder eventually in terms of your business model? How do you, in terms of like appealing to them in terms of what the good that you'll be doing in a certain like ed tech sector, or the fact that the business model, there's a number of ways that the company can earn
Yeah,
revenue.
I certainly can't speak for everyone. I can speak on behalf of myself, and even within myself, I can give it within the context of early Dan Kwan and today Dan Kwan. So 2012, 2013, the way that would appeal to me is, for me, would be you're going to be working with this other person, this other guy who's really, really good at iOS, and he will train you up, and you'll just learn a lot better. I would be very down with that. I would love to work on a project like that because of my skill. I knew my skills weren't quite professional grade at that point, and I knew I needed to get better, and that would work for me. And for most early devs, like that's the case. That's pretty accurate, I would say, for most early engineers. Years 1 to 3 of their career. Today, money talks. Just it's the same thing as everyone else. Money talks, and if you're competitive with my other clients, then whenever I get a new like client inquiry, sort of, they always ask. The questions always come up like, "Are you available?" I'm like, "Well, I'm available if you're going to pay me $1 million. Yeah, like I'm always for sale. Like, yeah, what's your rate? What's your budget? Then I'll tell you if I'm available. Like, we live in an economy. Like, yeah, I'm available if you pay me the rate. Like, if you supersede the rate my other clients are paying. Now, I'm not going to just ditch my other clients. I'm going to wrap things up and work out a transition. But I mean, that rarely happens anyway. But like, are you available? Yeah. It's like, is your house for sale? No. What if I offered you $15 million? Yeah, it's for sale now. Sure, here you go.
Like, so the top guys in software development are motivated primarily by money.
No. That's. I'm talking about me again. But like, that wouldn't be fair. The real top guys are just motivated by working on their own stuff. And so like Turbo, I built Turbo over the course of maybe 4 to 6 months. I didn't get paid for it. It wasn't a business venture. I just did it because after I got done with my client work during the day, I would work on my own stuff at night. That's how much programming I do. right? And that's what the top guys do. Like, they're going to program no matter what. They're going to be working on something no matter what. I think a very common misconception is that when I'm approached to be a co-founder, the notion is that I have none of my own stuff going on. I have like 4 projects I'm working on, and like they're getting traction. Like I get Turbo's up to over 6,000 users now. I get about 20, 25 signups a day. We probably got 3 signups during this workshop, right? And I get around 2 premium signups a week. So, it's going fine. I'm happy with it. Now, can someone pull me away from that? Yeah, if for the right offer, right? It's gonna be a tough pull, but like I said, I'm a businessman. Like I'm willing to listen. So those are the considerations. Again, also bear in mind, I'm on year 7 of my career. Like if you're talking to a guy who's on year 1 or year 2, the conversation is different. And that's what I mean by you have to offer him what he wants or her what she wants, which is leveling up their skill, finding a way they can do that. So.
Are there any projects that you can imagine where you're interested in the technical challenge?
Yeah.
And you might do that for where that would be more of a consideration
Yes.
than money? Yeah. So,
Yes.
Okay. So something fun or cool.
Absolutely.
Or
Anything with
Right.
predictive analysis. This is me again speaking personally. Anything with deep learning and predictive analysis, using what's called TensorFlow. I'd be all over that, especially if I was paid. I mean, that's another one of those things where I'm going to eventually do on my own for free anyway.
Yeah.
May as well get paid for it, right?
What's it called?
TensorFlow, right? But like if a company came to me and said, we want you to work on our deep learning predictive analysis software for our because we have billions of data points accrued over 10 years, and we need to create a machine learning model on TensorFlow, right? And they already know that's not my area of expertise, but they're like, we want to pay you to get better at this.
Yeah.
I'd be
You
like,
might
yeah,
do it with other people.
yeah, I'd be like, yeah, let's do
right.
this. Like,
So-
this would be awesome, yeah. That's not gonna happen. Like, that would be a very weird, like, it would be a very unusual offer. But if that happened, I'd be like, yeah, sure, let's do this. It'll be great. I'm gonna do it anyway. May as well get paid. So, I skipped that slide. So going into the actual development, feature creep. So what tends to happen is once your concept or your vision, I just want to make sure I'm on time, we got time, begins to take shape, what often happens is the founder gets very excited, and it's a very exciting time to see what you're doing actually coming to life. And then what happens is, now let's add this feature, let's add that feature, let's work on this. Resist that as much as you can. This is a matter of personal discipline. Stick to the script. Like, here's what we planned on building. Don't do anything else until that's done. Okay? That's a very important thing to understand. Because once you get away from that, you start making emotional decisions. That's going to kill you. And number 2, you're making decisions based on your intuition, not user feedback. And I've learned this the hard way many, many, many times. Your intuition is always wrong. The user feedback is what you need to get. And keep in mind, I've been doing this for 7 years. There's many apps and many websites I built that went nowhere. I have a whole graveyard of projects that just went nowhere, that I spent thousands of hours on, my own time for free, that just went nowhere. Because I thought I knew what the user wanted. I thought that when I put this out, there are going to be so many users saying, this is amazing, like we have to download this and use it and share it with friends. No, none of that happened. And it's a very sobering reality. The only thing for me, which was a saving grace, is that I didn't hire anyone to build that stuff. I hired myself, right? So I didn't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I did spend my own time, right? That's time I could have been either billing a client or just spending with friends or just whatever, doing other stuff. But, I've been wrong many, many, many more times than I've been right. And that's what you have to understand going into it. So what that means is resist the urge to keep on building new stuff, new features, and try to get to feedback as much as you can. That's down here. the last point is consider a focus group approach. That movie studios and TV shows, they focus group everything. Endings of movies are based on focus groups. So they'll have like 3 different endings, and they'll focus group all of it, and they'll get like feedback saying which ending did you like the most, and then they put that one in. Like that's how it's done.
That's why they're all happy.
Right, exactly. But those studios, like they're smart. They know what they're doing. Oh, here's a good story. Going back to April and May of this year, I auditioned for a commercial for Apple in New York City because they were holding open casting calls in my office building. So I was like, I'll just go down for my lunch break and I'll audition because it's right downstairs. After a couple callbacks, I got the part. And so we filmed the entire commercial at a big mansion out in New Jersey. They had a huge set. They had like 10 of those trucks where actors dress up and whatnot. And I spent maybe 15 hours there, and we did all these commercial shoots and whatnot. They never aired the commercial because what happened was they actually had that same production going on 5 different places all over the country. And then they focus grouped it. And then they picked the one the focus group liked the most. And you know that commercial with the girls like looking at things and it just opens up? The Apple commercial where she's like looking, it unlocks. That's the one, and we didn't win, quote unquote. I mean, I still got paid and everything, but that's what Apple did. They focus grouped it, and I can't even show you, unfortunately, any of the footage because they keep all of it to prevent guys like me from putting it on YouTube. So, otherwise, that's exactly what I would have done. But that's what they did. They focus group everything, and then they pick the one that gets the best response. These are the smartest people conceivably in the world. Like, follow their lead. Do what they're doing. Focus group. Get feedback. Yeah.
What does focus group mean?
So let's say this is a room of 4 people, right? And I have 2 versions of my website. The same product, but 2 different sites. And I show you one, and you go through it. And then I show you another one, and then I ask, which one did you like better? Like, why did you like this one better versus that one? And like, what's easier to navigate? Which one is easier to understand? That's focus group.
So then are people selected just
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
They get paid for their efforts.
Yeah.
Randomly or depending on who you're trying to reach, you would.
That's actually a very good reason why you want to consider joining a co-working space like this. In New York City, when I was at WeWork, there were focus groups like all the time. A company would say, we're gauging user feedback in conference room A Monday at 1 p.m. If you want some free beer or whatever, come on over. I would do it for the free beer. So just go down and focus group whatever they're testing, and that's a great way to iterate. That's the only way you should be iterating, and you should not be trying to anticipate user need, user demand. So that kind of segues into this. I was kind of one slide ahead in my speech. This is what you should be doing. And then all of your development iteration should be based on, to the extent possible. There are certain things that you just have to kind of go on your gut, but you should minimize that as much as you can. Does that make sense? So let me give you one example for Turbo. I did a lot of classes in New York City where I'm teaching people literally how to code, and people wanted so much of kind of training wheels. They wanted ways to build out a website and a product with a lot of the stuff already built in. That's called a scaffolding engine. So in Turbo, I built out 4 or 5 scaffolding engine options where you can quickly spin up a website and deploy it without doing too much initial coding. That's scaffolding. And people wanted that because when I was teaching people, they kept on not asking for it explicitly, but I kept asking, can I clone into a repo and just get started? Do you have the code base just to get going, and I can take it from there? They wanted that, and so I kind of picked up on that. And I'll show you more examples after I get to the end. But so all of these factors culminate into the worst outcome, which is this: failure to launch. I hate to say I've actually worked with startups that actually never launched, and that's truly depressing. Even if you're getting paid, it's still, you want to get it out there. You want to see it in the wild. You want to see what it's going to do out in the real world. But what tends to happen is once you have too much feature creep and over optimization, you blow your budget on that, and then you can't. There's no more money for follow-on development, and that's what happens. And I'm not going to work for free. Most developers won't. And so once the budget's maxed out, and if there's literally no more money behind it, well, I got to move on to the next client, right? And that for me has happened a couple times in the past. It doesn't happen as much anymore because my client base has sort of gone up a level. So I'm dealing with Series A level startups now almost exclusively. So my client base typical is like $4 to $10 million of financing. So that's not going to happen to them. But we're talking like 200,000 or even less, like 150K. Let's say that's your entire financing, right? And you've already put 50 of that into office space or whatever, and you hired a marketer, and you hired this, that, and the other. You hired a PR firm, and you're down to 25K for development. Well, that 25K, that's going to be gone pretty fast. And then what? Like, we never got it out the door, and that's bad, obviously. So you want to reverse that process as quickly as you can. You want to get something out the door as quickly as possible. This is essentially the crux of the lean startup methodology. Get something out the door, get it in front of people, and then feedback.
Oh, because arriving today in my mailbox.
Yeah, take that with a grain of salt. It is over 10 years old, so a lot of the mantras in there. The actual core tenets I still very strongly agree with, but some of the nitty gritty I would take with a grain of salt. Like one of the main things is just get up a landing page and then solicit feedback right away. But in circa 2010 or whenever it was written, 2009, getting up a landing page on its own was a bit of a task. So if you have a good landing page, you already look pretty professional. Today, not so much. This is sort of the main idea of my last demo. Like, it's much easier just to get something out the door. So you get all these like sort of crappy landing pages. So if I'm looking at an accelerator portfolio, which I do a lot, I go through all their websites, and they all have sort of the same crappy landing page on WordPress and whatnot. I know that they're all being told to read through this and then follow the step-by-step procedure of lean startup, and it becomes kind of self-evident to somebody who's been in the game as long as I have, right? And then I'll show you some more examples after I get to the end of these slides. You can kind of see it after a while. So I would say like the actual nitty gritty, like just throw up a landing page on WordPress and create a fake sign-up form and see who signs up and whatnot. That's essentially what Steve Blank is espousing. I would take a step beyond that and just focus on getting feedback somehow or some way. That's the main thing I would focus on. Oh, okay. So that was the last slide. Good. So these are the things I've seen pretty much over and over. This is not theoretical. These are things I've actually seen, some of which I'm guilty of. So, a lot of this is stuff that I can see coming down the road. These are patterns, kind of like you would see, in any other industry, that if you've been in long enough, you can see it happening. But the important point is that they're preventable. They're preventable. That's the important point. And my goal is to prevent you from making these mistakes. That's what I'm trying to sort of convey as part of my operation here in Washington, D.C. So a lot involved in that is I want to work with a lot of startups in an advisory capacity, and get them going with developers who I think are a good fit for what they're trying to do. Maybe even help out a few, like for example, throwing up a landing page for someone like anyone here. Like, I'm happy just to help you out with that. Take an hour. It's easy. It's not a hard thing to do. Setting up a fully scalable database-driven application, a little bit different. However, I can still put you in touch with the right people. Once I get my courses going next year, after New Year's, I'm doing a lot of development courses, full stack development courses, where I train a lot of devs. This is something I did back in New York City. And then I use that as my de facto recruiting. I find which of those students are the best ones, and I sub those out to my clients. And that's what I did in New York. on an informal basis. I did it in New York. I want to do it here on a formal basis. That's my goal. So that's why I'm doing a workshop today at 3 for programmers, which you're welcome to stay and see. You can actually see some hardcore, well, it's not hardcore, but you can see some code and see how things work. Everything I'm explaining here, you can see it happen, like actually see it, from a code standpoint at least. So that's my goal. Yeah, we're pretty much right on time. You have questions? Anything you want to see?
Dan, do you know of anyone in sales or marketing with startups who would help out with that, like giving advice or at least sitting down with somebody like me in terms of like getting the website out there or the
In New York, I do.
Yeah.
In DC, I'm still sort of building my network.
Yeah.
But in New York, I do. I can follow up with you on that
Cool.
individually if you want.
Yeah, that's something I'm really focusing on now is getting enough customers so I can kind of start building
Yeah,
feedback.
you're at a good level because I did look at your site and
Yeah.
the site looks okay. So
I
now you
built
need
it by myself and I have no like very
Yeah.
little.
What I
software
would do,
background.
first of all, do you have anyone visitations on the site?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I have traffic.
And do you have recurring traffic?
Yeah.
Okay, so then the next thing you want to do
Biggest thing
is
is like conversions.
right.
Like
What
getting
you want to do next is
sales.
build an email list.
Yeah, I
So-
have one now.
Right, and then get the email newsletter going.
Yeah.
That's the next thing.
Yeah.
And then you need to start creating the content that's germane to your newsletter. You have to know your audience.
Yep.
So you have to make sure that whatever content you create, your audience wants. Otherwise, they'll unsubscribe. And then you want to send out that newsletter once a week or so. And that'll really buttress your recurring traffic. The newsletter for me, I can kind of see when I send out a newsletter, the spikes go way up. Another thing I should have mentioned here in development is not measuring. Analytics is so important. And here, I'm going to turn this off because I don't want to show the analytics on the YouTube video. So I recorded all this. I'm going to put it on YouTube. I'll send it to you afterwards. Now that I'm